Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyervip.com. Today is July the 27th, 2017. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Let me do some housekeeping first. Many of you commented in response to the Jarrell Miller video about a sparring session that took place between Jarrell Miller and Deontay Wilder, right, where, according to some reports at least, Wilder had the upper hand. Right now, if you believe the Wilder people, Jarrell Miller got a concussion and had to go to the hospital after the sparring session. If you believe Jarrell Miller, the boxing was no problem with Deontay Wilder, but he suffered from dehydration, right? Apparently he was visiting Alabama. He fought Deontay Wilder in Deontay Wilder's backyard, and he claims that after the bout he was dehydrated and his cousin or associate took him to a hospital where he got an IV. He claims it had nothing to do with his head. Right, let's keep an eye on this story. I've put a link to Jarrell Miller talking with Deontay Wilder in an interview, right? The two guys yelling at each other and stuff like that. I think people involved in the sport understand that they have to kind of sell a fight before the fight happens, right? It's professional prize fighting. You're trying to get the customer base interested. Certainly these two guys, with their differing versions of what happened before Miller went to the hospital, right, are really putting us in a position where when these two guys do fight, I think it's going to be huge, right? Let me also point out too that some other subscribers corrected me. I, for some reason, thought that Miller was the underdog against Gerald Washington, right? Many of you pointed out to me that, at least in the United Kingdom, Washington is actually favored over Miller, right? Fair enough. Fair enough. Either way, I still think Miller wins the fight, right? We'll see what happens. Because Miller has been on a streak of KOs and because he's going to be hyper aggressive, right, coming forward on Gerald Washington, because Washington is a guy who will have fights like that turn into brawls. His fight against Amir Mansour, let me thank subscribers for mentioning his name to me, right? I believe someone is going to get stopped in this fight. The bet I like is Jarrell Miller to win, hedged with Washington by KO. Now let's shift gears, right? Let's talk about the biggest fight this weekend, which might actually be Adrien Broner against Mikey Garcia. Right now, I personally feel that Broner is a live underdog. I've said that in a prior video, right? Mikey Garcia just doesn't have experience at 140 pounds, right? Adrien Broner, and I realize that many of you disagree with this next statement, but Adrien Broner to me is a defensive wizard, right? He's a guy who, quite frankly, if you're in the pocket, can block most of your shots. I also feel that Broner is an underrated puncher, right? A lot of Broner's best work is off very short punches. These aren't the kind of punches that look as devastating on film as, let's say, Deontay Wilder or David Haye hitting you from the next area code, right? These are punches that are short, where you notice the guy fighting Broner suddenly wilts in front of him, right? Now, the great Bill Russell, a guy who I personally feel is as good a philosopher as he was an NBA basketball player, and he's in the NBA Hall of Fame, right? One of the most mentally tough guys I know. famously said that the great ones are always different. Right? Russell had a theory on sports where there was the status quo. And if you looked at the great ones, they always did something that was off-key relative to traditional thinking. Right? Malcolm Gladwell calls them outliers. Right? Well, very important piece today on BoxingScene.com. It's one I agree with. It's Paulie Malignaggi breaking down Mikey Garcia against Adrien Broner. And he makes the point that Broner, who lost to Marcus Maidana, right? By the way, he also lost to Sean Porter. That's not really discussed in the piece. But Malignaggi points out that Marcus Maidana was very unorthodox. He didn't do things the status quo way. He was, in the words of someone like Bill Russell, different. Right? So Maidana, who was a very hard puncher, but who was awkward, threw off Broner, who really is finely tuned, right? Broner's game is designed to dismantle someone who is in the box, right? Someone who's status quo. Someone who is, to use Malignaggi's words, fundamentally sound. Right? So, here was Broner, who was hoping to fight a fundamentally sound fighter. And instead, here's Marcus Maidana with his feet all wrong. He's throwing punches at odd angles, right? One of the punches that really hurt Broner came from over Broner's head. I'm not kidding, right? Broner couldn't read Marcus Maidana, right? It was orthodox against unorthodox, right? It was fundamental against original. He couldn't handle original. Well, Malignaggi's point is that Mikey Garcia, younger brother of famed boxing trainer Robert Garcia, right? Mikey Garcia is fundamentally sound. Now, sometimes that helps you, right? Fighters want to be fundamentally sound. They want, you know, the mechanics to be such that they have proper leverage on their shots. They have a defensive construct. They know how to defend themselves. They can handle themselves inside the pocket. You know, they're not exposing parts of their body. They're not crossing their legs, right? Being fundamentally sound can help you. Malignaggi's point, and I believe it's a big one, right? Malignaggi's point is that being fundamentally sound against Adrien Broner actually hurts you, right? I believe that's one of the secrets to Broner. People think I'm delusional when I call Broner defensively blessed. Folks, he's one of the most defensively blessed fighters in the sport. I have no idea, none, how Mikey Garcia could be visiting Broner at 140 pounds, right? Keep in mind, Broner's the guy with the experience at 140. And yet Broner is a greater than 2-to-1 underdog in Vegas, right? Who made these odds? I know Mikey's a good fighter. I know Mikey's unbeaten. I know he's a future Hall of Famer. But, wow, I have my doubts on whether Mikey Garcia is going to be able to get through Broner's defense. Let me say this too. One of the knocks I have on Broner, my own analysis on Broner, is that Broner is, sooner or later, Mikey Garcia, who beard and jewelry, and he's talking about baby mamas and all this other stuff. Forget the persona. Broner is really a computer in the ring, right? He's there figuring out how to dismantle you. Very cerebral guy, right? Broner's problem, let's be blunt here, his big problem is the fact that he really hasn't been physically fit for some fights, right? He's had a problem making weight. His problem's physical. It's not mental to me, right? Broner, when Broner solves your code, the John Molina fight, Broner dominates you. Now, I've looked at a lot of film of Mikey Garcia, and Mikey Garcia is a power puncher who's accustomed to hitting guys and then watching them fall down, right? Mikey knows how to use length. Mikey can deliver power from distance, right? The problem, though, is, in my opinion, you see Mikey Garcia's punches coming if you're defensively blessed. I believe Broner is going to know exactly what Mikey Garcia is doing because, as Paulie Malignaggi points out, Mikey is fundamentally sound, right? The problem with being fundamentally sound is someone can look at you and then say, okay, well, he fits this paradigm, right? They can figure out what you're doing much more readily than they can against someone like Marcus Maidana, who you cannot really replicate in a gym, right? So, I think Broner is a very live, I mean very live, underdog against Mikey Garcia, right? Very live. I'll agree that since Broner got roughed up by Marcus Maidana, let's remember, Broner's not stopped. Broner doesn't get stopped by Maidana. He doesn't get stopped by Sean Porter, right? But because we've seen Broner badly hurt in a fight, he's badly hurt against Marcus Maidana. And because Broner has had a problem making weight in the past, right? Because, according to reports, days before the Adrien Granados fight, he tells Granados, hey, we're going to fight one weight class up because he was having problems making weight. Because 140 these days is really the bottom end of the weight range that Broner can make. I believe the hedge has to be Mikey Garcia by KO. In other words, Mikey is a KO puncher. He knocks guys out. If Adrien Broner is weight deprived, and I understand that Broner's looking great, right? Broner looks like he's in shape for this fight. But if he's not in shape, if he's weight deprived, and if he gets caught, right? It happens to everyone. If he gets caught in the fight, right? There's a possibility that he can be stopped. So this is that fight where I like the underdog to win the fight. You're getting better than 2-to-1 odds. No reason to be greedy, right? Get Adrien Broner all of the options on him just by taking him to win. So if he wins by KO, great. Keep in mind, as I said, Broner hits hard. Mikey Garcia is coming up in weight, right? If he wins by KO, great, you win. If he wins by decision, great, you win. You don't care how he wins, as long as he wins, right? But I'd hedge the play with Mikey, who is unbeaten, who is a big favorite, right? He's 3-to-1 in some shops, with Mikey Garcia by KO, right? But understand the risk involved. If Mikey does get up on his toes, if Mikey does start using length, he knows how to. If he decides to dance away from Adrien Broner and get a decision, you lose it all, right? That's how I see it. I think a fundamentally sound fighter like Mikey Garcia is going to pose very few surprises for Adrien Broner, who I consider to be defensively blessed, right? The secret to beating Broner is to not be right in front of him, right? To either be at completely odd angles, like Marcus Maidana was, right? Next to him. Not in front of him, but next to him. Or to be sudden, like Sean Porter, right? Where you're outside, suddenly you're inside. As I said, Sean Porter's like a horror movie, right? The zombie's back here, suddenly the zombie's right in front of you, right? If you're a guy who's around the pocket, even if it's on the outskirts of the pocket, like Mikey Garcia, I think you're at risk with a guy like Adrien Broner, right? Look through the Broner persona, right? Broner's the guy who's noticing everything in the ring, right? He's going to look at Mikey Garcia. He's going to figure out what Mikey's throwing. I'm just telling you, Mikey's best shot in this fight, it's kind of counterintuitive, but his best shot in this fight is to land big punches early in the bout before Broner, who makes adjustments, figures out the angles of the punches. Right? If you're watching this fight and it gets to the 5th or 6th round and Adrien Broner doesn't look dazed, he hasn't been hit, he's not cut, he's not having a problem seeing, then you're going to know Mikey's in big trouble. Anyway, that's how I see it. Let me hear from you. I hope you leave your comments in the comment section to this video, and I hope you stop by boxingscene.com to read Paulie Malignaggi's comments. Let me also say, Malignaggi has some comments on Conor McGregor, who he sparred with. Right? He considers McGregor to be an above-average puncher and someone who is accurate. Right? So food for thought. Being a boxing fan, I wonder, though, if McGregor has something different than, let's say, Marcus Maidana has. Maidana, big puncher. Floyd beat him twice. Right? Then Diego Corrales had. Corrales, big puncher. Floyd's the person who stopped his unbeaten streak. Right? You could be an accurate puncher. Is he going to be able to get those accurate power punches through Floyd Mayweather's defense? I have my doubts. Also, in terms of hand speed, I personally think there's a gap here, right? Even with Mayweather now being in his 40s, I think Mayweather has the faster hand speed than Conor McGregor. But clearly, McGregor does have a talent if you're one of those people who believes, as I do, that McGregor with a big punch has a puncher's chance. Okay, fair enough, right? But the puncher's chance with McGregor has to be your hedge. I believe the main part of your bet should be Mayweather by stoppage. Anyway, that's how I see it. Let me hear from you. Hope you leave your comments in the comment section to this video. Thanks for stopping by.